Hello there, Atheist Junior here, your friend and humble narrator, and today we have a very special guest on the stream with me, Gutsick Gibbon, aka Erika. Now, the content that Erika makes for her channel is excellent for two main reasons. The first is that she handily destroys young Earth creationist arguments, and secondly, her videos are both well researched and also well edited with the best, like just the best memes. Her channel focus is videos about primates and the life sciences under the umbrella of evolutionary biology, namely paleontology, anthropology, and zoology. So Erika is currently a Master's of Research student in primate biology, behavior, and conservation with a BSA in pre-professional animal science with minors in anthropology and biology. So if you like this interview, check out Erika's YouTube channel and consider becoming one of her patrons at patreon.com/gutsickgibbon. And I'll also have links to her merch and her Amazon wish list in the pinned comment. So first off, Erika, thank you so much for being here today. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. Yeah, you nailed it. That's the perfect opener. That's usually my spiel, except I do appreciate the merch shilling. I always appreciate the
Oh, absolutely.
And I appreciate that the fine kind of man of culture I see for the meme appreciation. I try to stay as up to date as possible on my on my jokes, but
Yeah, it's really one of the reasons that I enjoy your videos so much. Not just how thorough they are, but also I think you need some sort of humor in there to sort of break up the dry sciencey stuff.
It adds a nice kind of brevity to everything. And I think too, it's honestly sometimes it's really the only way to respond to some of the stuff that comes out of the the major creationist organizations. For a bunch of professionals, sometimes the only response is a joke because that's kind of what they're putting out there. It's a tit for tat.
Yeah, I guess you have to laugh so you won't cry, basically.
Yeah, because let their quarterly returns lull you to sleep at night.
Yeah, so thanks for coming on the channel. Also, I wanted to congratulate you on submitting your thesis paper.
Oh, thank you.
Sure, I know you can't talk about the results, but can you tell me what the topic was?
Oh yeah, I can talk about that all day. That's a question you have to be really careful with. So the question that my thesis was trying to address is what environmental pressures act on primates in order to have a monomorphic dentition emerge from a dimorphic dentition. So what that basically means is in a lot of primate species, we have sexually dimorphic canines. So males have these big honking canines, females have these little itty bitty canines. Sometimes they're masculinized, other times they're not. And males typically use them to compete, actively fighting, or just displaying. And they usually tend to pop up in polygamous multi-male, multi-female societies. That being said, there are also a ton of monomorphic primates. So primates where males and females have the same size canines, whether they're huge and dire-like, like in the gibbons, or whether they're itty-bitty and not really used very much, like in the tamarins. And so my question was, given what we know from the primate fossil record, which suggests that we have a very early emergence of sexual dimorphism in the canines in some of the adapids and some of the omamyoids, my question was, what caused monomorphism to reemerge? Because we have so many monomorphic primates and they've emerged evidently independently in multiple different lineages. So the pressures can't be that mysterious. It has to be something that's relatively easy to track down. And indeed, I found that it was a relatively obvious thing. That what I was testing was whether or not it had to do with general group size, relative female aggression, things like diet and habitat were originally on the table, but kind of removed them later, and then the dispersal sex and the coalition sex. And it was really fun. It was not what my plan was originally, but it ended up being what I had to work with. I was supposed to go and do behavioral research in Malaysia, but that did not happen because it was 2020. So,
yeah. Well, I know that you got, I think you submitted your thesis like a month early, but you only got it back with notes on it like a day before you had to submit it again. So what was that process like? It must have been pretty hectic, like editing that.
It was horrible. Yeah, that was absolutely god awful. My professor, my advisor actually, was in an area where he had very little Wi-Fi, and so while he had done his notes on the actual thesis itself, he couldn't get them back to me until he came back in town, which was unfortunately the day before, like within 24 hours of the thesis submission deadline. And I had gotten results and feedback from other professors that I had known, but this was the guy who's my primary examiner, right? Like he's the guy whose opinion I really need. And he sent it back to me with this like, "Hey, I'm really sorry that this is so late." And I was like, it's cool. Like I won't sleep tonight. Like I'm gonna have to go to bed. And so that's what I did. And I just, thankfully, it was very little of the comments had to do with the content, if you will, like necessarily conceptually what I was saying. It was a lot of grammar, a lot of reformatting my entire bibliography, a lot of stuff like that. Really time consuming, but not super like, you could kind of do it no thoughts, head empty mode, which was nice. But it was, big pain in the butt. And I've been waiting for results on my thesis for almost 2 months now, because they have to examine it themselves. You have to have your main examiner, and then a secondary examiner, and then external examiners have to look at what they've said and make sure that it isn't like nitpicky and biased, right? So that's what I'm waiting on. It should, a couple weeks ago, I got the notice that it should be within the next month. That was like 2 weeks ago. So hopefully within the next 2 weeks, we'll see. I'm just hoping I pass.
I'm sure you'll do great. So I think it'd be fair to say that like the motto of your channel is describing humans as gentle and modern apes. Can you elaborate on the meaning behind that?
Well, it's more, it's a little less describing us as gentle and modern apes, and it's more that's what we should strive to be. Because humans, like many other animal, like all other animals, but indeed like other primates, are prone to emotional outbursts. We descend from social animals that have to mitigate social interactions, and that can be highly stressful on us, and especially because we now live in an environment that is not at all similar to the environment that we evolved in. With some, individuals being highly atomized and alone and not having any social interaction, and others just being inundated with way too many social interactions. We're just not equipped for that kind of stress. And so, gentle and modern is kind of saying, you have to be modern. You can choose to be gentle and kind to your fellow humans, which is something that, we could all use the reminder. I could as well.
Right. Well, a lot of people have trouble getting past the ape part, but
That's true. That's a good point. Yeah. I've yet to hear a single actual argument for why humans are not hominoids or hominids, despite the combined effort of numerous YouTube creationists and the soliciting of help from the professional creationists as well.
Are you saying they haven't turned over evolutionary theory yet?
No, they haven't. They're working on it, though. I hear they're really working hard. Any day now, I'm sure they'll zoom in and really flip the table on the paradigm.
They're chipping away at it.
Yeah, they're chipping away. It's real slow. Big boss fight.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Erika, for your feedback on my debate with Kent Hovind. What was your experience like debating him? I'm almost scared to ask, but I'm curious.
Yeah, well, it was very similar to your experience. I mean, Kent is masterclass when it comes to not actually answering any questions, despite having a conversation for over 2 hours. You could talk to him for 8 hours straight, and I doubt you would get much more out of him than you did in your 2-hour conversation. At least that's what my experience was. He is an actual pro when it comes to hearing what you're saying and pivoting it into, do you seriously believe you're related to a mosquito? He's great. Loves it. And it's got to be argument ad absurdum, right? It's got to be the two most distantly related things he can think of, which aren't even the most distantly related things, which really shows how much, how many gears Kent is working with up in his noggin. But it's whales and pine trees, or mosquitoes and whales, or, whales and something small or very different. You really believe you came from an amoeba? He loves that one too. But yeah, I mean, it's a frustrating experience, as I'm sure, as I know that you experienced in your conversation with him. It's very vacuous is kind of how I would put it, as far as any kind of
Yeah,
answers.
it's kind of like staring into the void.
Yeah, yeah. Avoid
Well,
smears that with a Hawaiian shirt.
yeah, I feel like your debate with him, at least for me watching it, was especially frustrating because it really seemed like it just never got off the ground. Like you asked him the same like three questions, I think, like over and over again. I feel like at least with my debate, like I was able to sort of maybe trick Kent into trying answering a couple like questions or thought experiments, and I would sort of like make my point, and then Kent would just sort of say, "Well, okay." And he
Yep.
would just like, okay, so I guess we're just moving on to the next thing. Like you're not going to acknowledge like the point that I just made. But I think I saw a really interesting tweet you made the other day when somebody was saying like that humans aren't apes or something like that. And I think it was something like that humans and chimpanzees are more closely related or share more DNA similarities than African and Asian elephants.
Yeah,
And
it's
that,
not just those two.
it blew
Yeah,
my mind a little bit.
it really is pretty crazy. I mean, it's the interesting thing about that one in particular too is the divergence time is relatively similar. African and Asian elephants split from their last common ancestor more or less around the same time that humans and chimps did, and yet we've changed less than they have. And we look quite a bit more different when to a layman, but when you actually get down into looking at their skeletal structure and the environments that they've adapted to, I mean, it's really not all that. It's really not all that similar. But that same logic holds for many different organisms that creationists, for example, would have absolutely no problem designating as the same kind of animal.
Mm-hmm.
House cats and any of the big cats pretty much they differ by around 95% on their coding base pairs, similar with rats and mice, which I don't know anybody who would look at a rat and a mouse and say that these are, two fundamentally distinct organisms. To a layman, a 5-year-old could tell the difference. I mean, it's so obvious to anyone, with half a brain. But humans and chimps, it's a different story, and I think that it's because superficially the main difference is how we walk and the amount of hair or fur that we have on our bodies, and because most people just don't get a chance to see chimpanzees or bonobos actually moving around and seeing them interact with one another. Because the second that you actually get up close and personal, be it in a zoo setting or in the wild, looking at these animals, you start to see just how like them we really are. And just in the little things, how we move about, how we communicate with each other, our facial expressions, our gestures. A really famous paper that underscored this very well was one that examined the gestural repertoire of toddlers and chimps, and it found that they shared over 90% of their gestures. They mean the same thing. Their gestures have the same vocabulary. And this is something that almost appears to be a bit innate, which is cool, and instinctual, which is interesting, and that divergence is actually even a bit more kind of interesting in my opinion. Why is there a 10% difference is kind of what we should be asking. But, that tweet was mostly just because Walker and I were working on a Proboscidean video at the time, and it's just, pick two animals that look really similar, and odds are humans and chimps are more closely related than they are, which is really
cool. I had a slide on my debate with Kent that was like hamsters and gerbils, I think it was.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Yeah, I remember that from your presentation. That was a great one, especially because these are pets. These are these are things most people will interact with, or at least they know what they are. Which is why usually it's house cat and a tiger, because people tend to be like, or a lion and a tiger. They understand those are two close things, but not the same thing. I mean, it's tough because species are arbitrary anyways, but lineages are not, which is interesting. I remember. Refresh my memory. What was Kent's response to that? Gerbils and hamsters. Was he comfortable saying those were the same kind?
Well, that was in my opening statement, which Kent mostly ignored.
Yeah. Okay. No.
But I did. I mentioned to him that donkeys and horses, I think it was, have a difference of 2 chromosomes, and he thinks they're the same kind. And then I told him that humans and chimps have a difference of 2 chromosomes, but he thinks that they're separate kinds. And I told him that it was a double standard, and he was just like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, that sounds
He just really didn't say anything. And with how much Kent loves to talk, I take that as a win.
I would too. Yeah. I mean, if I could do it again, if I could debate Kent Hovind again, which I don't know that I would be able to put myself through that. But if I were to debate Kent again, I think I would focus more on my rhetoric rather than what I'm actually saying, because Kent does not care about the information that you're actually trying to convey. He doesn't care what you have to say. Like for him, it's about hearing himself talk and grandstanding in front of his room full of people. So, that's about as far as you're going to get, I think, is going the rhetorical route, which is, more what you did. I would go things more your way if I could do it a second time.
So, Erika, what's the big deal with skulls? What can we learn from skulls?
Wow, that's a big question. You can learn a lot from skulls. You can learn a ton from skulls. From, first and foremost, it's where you house the brain. It's the location of the brain case. So you can get a pretty good idea of the brain to body ratio if you've got the skull and some postcrania. And then you can kind of start to get into cognition when you start taking things like endocasts and looking at the areas of the brain that are actually enlarged or highlighted, and how they reflect in the indentations of actually the inside of the skull, which is really cool. Another big one is you can usually tell based off of the position of the orbits whether or not an animal is a predator or prey or an omnivore. And you can combine that with what we know from their teeth to really get into what kind of niche this animal is involved in. What niche does this little guy occupy? Teeth are a big one. And the thing about teeth and them being housed, of course, in the skull, you get a really nice complete picture when you find a skull with all the teeth intact.
And the dental patterns too, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, actually, exactly. And you can also get a good idea when you've got something like the skull of the age of the animal, using things like the teeth, because how patterns of eruption of the teeth can give you a decent idea whether you're looking at an infant or a juvenile or an adult, or something that's geriatric. You can tell exactly what the organism's eating if you can get the dental microwear patterns on things like molars and shearing across the incisors and things like that. So huge benefit to having the skull with the teeth intact. You can tell, especially with mammals, because mammals postcrania is pretty much considered to be the most boring of any groups.
That was actually my follow-up question: is what are postcrania?
Yeah, so your postcrania is I was going to say south, but that is kind of not actually very informative. Anything that comes after the skull down the vertebral column. So you've got your crania and you've got your postcrania. Postcrania is everything else. So things like the limbs, the caudal vertebra, the thorax, the thoracic, I guess I should say, thoracic zone of the animal. And you can learn a lot about that kind of stuff, a lot about an animal from that kind of stuff too. In primates, and then especially in human evolution, it tends to be a bit more important than with other mammals, because if you can get a hold of things like the pelvis and the feet, or even stuff like the shoulders, the scapula, and kind of humerus, the whole pectoral girdle, you can tell a lot about how this guy moved. And because it's hominin evolution, knowing when that transition to bipedality occurred, and indeed what kind of bipedality it is, that can really help us kind of create this this lineage, or at least a series of lineages, a gradient of traits as they change over time.
Yeah, and talking about skulls and sort of the reconstruction of skulls. So usually most like young Earth creationist arguments are pretty much trash. But every now and then I'll see a complaint from them where it makes me think for a second. So one of the things that I've heard is when they criticize, like when you see a reconstruction of a skull and it's like the bone fragments are on the skull, the actual parts, it's like some small pieces, and then the rest of it is just a reconstruction made out of some type of plaster material. And they're asking like, well, how do they know all this other detail that isn't part of the isn't given from the shards? So can you sort of elucidate on that?
Yeah, reconstructions. That's a really important part of all paleontology, not just biopaleontology or anthropological paleontology. And the situation with the skulls, people tend to like to point to like middle level organisms as far as hominins go. So things like, how do you know that Lucy's skull looks the way it does when it's so fragmentary? I've got one behind me here where the fragmentary parts are actually highlighted. And yeah, it's super incomplete. So how do we know what Lucy looked like? Well, we actually have over 300 individuals individuals represented by varying specimens of Australopithecus afarensis. So we have a really, really nice kind of series of specimens to pull from, so we can create a skull using the bits that we have on one and the bits that we have on another, particularly if you have things like males and females and juveniles and elderly and things like that. You can get a really good idea of what this organism looked like during the period that it was alive. And the other thing is that they like to point to things like Australopithecus afarensis and specifically, Lucy, because they don't care about the species. They care about, easily understandable names that they can kind of pin with problems that they kind of drum up.
Yeah, we're going to get into that later.
yeah, exactly. But I mean, then you also have specimens like Sahelanthropus chilensis, where you've got the whole skull. You've got Ardipithecus ramidus, where even though it's been crushed, you do have most of the skull. You can reconstruct most of the animal. You've got things like Australopithecus sediba, the MH1 and MH2 specimens, where you've got huge parts of one individual and huge parts of another individual. So you've got this great idea of what this organism looked like when it was a singular individual and walking around. Same thing with you get a lot of the erectines. You've got a ton of Homo erectus specimens, just an absolutely gobsmackingly large amount. And the really cool thing is that if you've got stuff like the pelvis in hominin evolution, you can usually sex the individual. You can usually be like, okay, it's probably a male or it's probably a female. And you can also apply modern growth patterns. So if you can tell kind of the general age, then we know what the juveniles and what the adults probably looked like, because you can clock with their developmental process, the track that takes. So for instance, humans, we take forever to develop. Like we take so long to reach our adult form. And chimps, by contrast, to reach their adult form relatively quickly. And so it becomes super informative to have a vast number of specimens. But even when you don't, metrics are incredibly precise. So for instance, if you have part of the ramus of the jaw, that angle of the ramus, which is this portion of the jaw, let's see, where's my human skull? It's back here. It's this portion of the jaw. Right there, that L shape. You can get a pretty good idea of what this kind of distal, or rather rostral end of the jaw is going to look like based off of the angle that it's positioned at. So you can use clues to get within a range of error what this animal looked like, even if you don't have multiple specimens. But we don't even need to appeal to that, because we have so many of these critters. We've got so many hominins. For whatever reason, we've just been, incredibly lucky with finding hominins, even considering their relatively, it's okay. They're the taphonomy of these guys. They preserve at a decent rate in the area that they're living in.
The creationists like to focus on, like, no, we just have this one skull. Lucy exists in a vacuum. So that's sort of what they're looking at. But I think someone in the chat asked, like, what are the skulls that you have behind you? Like, what specimens or what type of animals are those from? One of them is obvious, but...
Yeah, well, this is a human. This is a member of Homo sapiens. The large one is a smilodon. It's a very bemolared smilodon. So the teeth actually, the back part of the teeth, the postcanine teeth, are not that accurate. This guy right here is just a coyote. That's the only legitimate skull here on the wall. The rest are reproductions. This guy right here is a rhesus macaque, a male rhesus macaque. And this one right beside it is a female siamang, which is a gibbon, essentially, the big throat sac gibbon. They're huge vocal communicators, vast vocal repertoire. Chimpanzee, common chimp, male, right there. And then right beside it, there it is. Yeah, that's Australopithecus afarensis. So that's Lucy, actually, is the specific specimen that represents.
Oh, wow. One of the things about Lucy that I sort of actually learned from a Bill Ludlow video that was kind of like a light bulb moment for me was when, he was talking about, I think, how creationists complained that Lucy's skeleton was very incomplete, but the fact that, you can basically mirror the bones that they have, since, humans are symmetrical, and you can basically, it basically counts for having all those other bones like the ribs and and the feet. I know for Lucy's species, they found foot bones of some other specimens, but that was kind of mind blowing for me also.
Yeah, and that's yeah, Bill was awesome. He really knew.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a great point. Yeah, humans are bilaterally symmetric. So if you've
Yep.
got one side, you've got the other.
Thank you.
And because we're bilaterally symmetric, that also means that if you've got, some of one side perhaps below the waist and some on in a different specimen kind of above the waist, you've basically got almost half of the skeleton, if you will, because you can mirror the top half and you can mirror the bottom half, and then it's the missing pieces here and there. And then, like I said, using things like forensic anthropology and what we know about extant primates, extant hominoids, and then also, of course, humans more specifically, you can actually fill in the blanks quite easily. Now, you'll have an error range. Like there are always going to be aspects of paleontology when it comes to reconstructions that you might be surprised by. Some stuff doesn't fossilize as well as other stuff, but fortunately, in paleoanthropology, it's a pretty simple species. It's pretty simple reconstruction because we know what these guys mostly are made of, right? It's not like fossilizing things like the wing membranes or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
It can get kind of dicey with regard to like the thickness and things like that. With hominoids, it's a lot more simple. We are sometimes quadrupedal, sometimes we're bipedal, and we don't have any like extraneous, I guess you would say, horns or anything like that.
Sailbacks.
Yeah, exactly. The worst thing is that we don't know how hairy we were at given periods. Like some people think that the Australopithecines were already losing their full fur body coverage, and others don't. So that's going to be kind of the harder aspect. But as far as like what we looked like with our musculoskeletal system, it's just not that difficult. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and again, usually with species, we're dealing with multiple specimens that can fill in the blanks on at least what your average individual is going to look like, average male or average female. Or if they're not sexually dimorphic, like Ardipithecus ramidus, you don't need it. Then you've only got one individual that you've kind of got a decent idea of what they looked like.
So one of the sort of tips that you talked about in one of your videos that will highlight if somebody doesn't really know what they're talking about is if they pronounce orangutan like orangutan.
Yeah.
Even though it like it's so easy to pronounce it like that, like you almost feel like it should be pronounced that way, but
Right.
that was helpful for me. Like that, I watched a few creationist videos where that popped up, and it made me think of that. Are there any like other like sort of red flags like that you've noticed when?
Oh yeah. Oh, so many. Another classic is ape men. If someone says ape men, you know they're a creationist. If they say evolutionist or evolutionism, they're a creationist. If they say paleo expert, they are a creationist. And specifically, you can know, and RJ is in the chat, and he knows this better than anyone else. Creationists are quite predictable in that you can usually tell by the terminology that they're using, that they're using, which book they're cribbing from as the primary source. Which is hilarious. Low confidence science, that's another one. That's a Stadler original. None of these terms that I just mentioned are used in conventional science. People who do science, they don't use those words. That's creationist jargon.
I do feel like colloquially on YouTube, evolutionists has sort of become in common use just because it's sort of, I guess, necessary. Like when you have a debate, it's like a creationist versus an evolutionist. It's just sort of become, vernacular out of convenience. But so my favorite video on your channel is 3 hours of busting creationists, and then in parentheses, it's that bad. And I rewatched the entire video before this stream, like not the 10-minute one, but the whole 3 hours.
Good boy, yeah.
And I noticed that Nephilim Free was saying Australopithecus several times, but he actually manages to pronounce orangutan right. So now I just don't know what to think. I mean,
no, yeah, that really throws a loop. I like to think that Nephew was probably like reading some kind of list when he's going through the extants. Although he also has Gigantopithecus as like the fourth age.
mm-hmm.
absolutely incredible. It's incredible then. It's still incredible to me. I have no
Yeah.
idea what source he could possibly be pulling from. I mean, it's like the Miocene apes never existed to this man, or bonobos, which is insane.
Yeah, your reaction to that is really great. Maybe
That was an authentic reaction too. I couldn't believe it. I was actually floored by that level of incompetence. It was impressive.
yeah, maybe he's just a contrarian or a sort of like hominid hipster or something like that. I don't know if you can
Yeah,
call it that.
it's gotta be. Yeah, Matthew is something else.
So during that video, I know that you were really shocked that they brought Neffy on as some sort of authority figure about Sediba, but I think I may have figured out why. If you go back to his channel and you sort the videos by oldest, some of the very first videos he released 3 or 4 videos about Sediba, and I think that's literally it. I think that's the reason. Yeah.
Not fabulous, Sediba? Really?
Yeah, I mean, I saw that. I know that they talked about that in the video also. But if you go it's like within the first 10 videos, he released a couple of videos about that. How do you say that species name? Australopithecus sediba.
Yeah.
Okay. See,
Yeah.
I'm trying not to mispronounce any big words, so you'll have to bear with me.
Listen, after I did that video, there were a couple of times when I was talking where I was, to be fair, talking about Nephilim Free, but I'd be like, Nephilim Free said Australopithecus, and then like within the minute I would be talking about like Australopithecines, and I was like Australo. Like it's just like, he's yeah, it's like a plague, a verbal plague.
Yeah, it's like a fog you don't want to breathe in.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but one of probably the most ridiculous part of that video is when you're watching SFT ask Neffy about how like 2 parts of a scapula could be found like some sort of far distance away from each other, but they fit together like puzzle pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And if he can explain this without explaining it as, them being from the same animal, but these are 2 different animals from 2 different species, and like he blatantly doesn't answer the question.
He doesn't answer it, and of course, our mutual friend Monkey for Banana feels absolutely no need to push him on that. Like you can hear it in his voice. He almost tentatively asks it in the first place. Like it's like surely someone would have like would have an answer to this. Perhaps Neffy knows. And he kind of puts it out there into the ether. And it's just like, like ships in the night. Like Neffy has no idea how to respond to that and feels no need to even attempt to swing at it. And then, of course, Standing has no desire to ask it again, which is you watch it for the first time and you're like, there's no way. Like there is no like cogent way to respond to that.
Yeah, because Neffy like confuses himself. He he like loses his own train of thought, and like he starts talking about, oh, there's a lot of different species of ancient apes, and I thought he was going to say something along the lines of like, maybe this is too, there are so many extinct apes that maybe it's possible that these could have come from 2 different species, but then he just goes off into left field, and MFB doesn't wrangle him in at all. Like he just sort of lets him go out into space.
I'm actually really glad you brought this up, because I feel like that doesn't get hammered home enough with these guys. Is like in the case of Australopithecus sediba, as well as some of the specimens of Homo habilis and closely related species like Rudolfensis and Gattingensis. We're looking at a super mosaic hominin, right? Like it is just, you couldn't ask for a better transitional species, if you will. And so they have to find a way to write them off. And it's actually hilarious to me because the source that they're mainly cribbing from is Contested Bones by Sanford and Roop, 2 absolutely horrific scientists when it comes to paleoanthropology, neither of which has anything close to a specialty in paleoanthropology or anything even adjacent to it. And yet they write a tome on it. It's absolutely
and
you don't find confidence like that anywhere but in creationism.
Yeah, and that book comes highly recommended by Kent Hovind.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure it does. And God, eventually, we'll tackle that eventually in Library of Errors, because it's just so chock full of incorrect information and misrepresentation. But what I was going to say is that in that book, that's where most of MFB's talking points come from, right? Especially with Australopithecus sediba. They'll be like, it's literally a jigsaw puzzle species in that it's got pieces from Australopithecines and pieces from humans, quote unquote, they mean genus Homo, intermixed, and then it's accidentally this grab bag species. But the problem is some of the parts of this species that are very clearly derived are found in articulation with the pieces that they think are Australopithecine. So you'll have these, like, for instance, the upper arm, the shoulder and the upper arm is very basal, but the end of the distal end of the arm, the hands and things like that is very derived. And, you find these things in either partial or full articulation in MH1 and MH2. But contested bones will say one is human, just the distal end is human, and the upper end is ape. So how are they articulated with one another? Why are they articulated partially or fully together? And that's where that whole thing with the scapula also came from. And MFB, he starts talking about this one time, and like mid-sentence, he realizes his mistake because they don't have an answer for this. Why are they in partial articulation or full articulation if they're from different species? And he references, because my comedy spit take on that is the creationists literally have to assume, right, that you've got these this Australopithecine and this human running at like top speed at each other, and they collide and instantly die, right, are swept away in such a way that their bones jumble together and just look like they're in actual like articulation with one another. They just look that way. And MFB starts recounting this, and he's saying, yeah, this was back when we were on good terms. Like, oh yeah, Gutsick Gibbon says, she makes kind of a funny joke about how it's, they must have collided, and he kind of pauses, like, yes, and what's the actual argument? And then he changes the subject because they have no way to account for this partial or full articulation. There is no answer other than they came from a single species, and that species is super mosaic and problematic.
Yeah, that's where the sleight of hand comes in. So when you were saying mosaic, that's when you're referencing one part of the articulation being basal and the other part being derived at the other end?
Of the whole species. So for instance, the brain case is very small, and it's mildly prognathic, but the dental arcade is starting to look like modern humans. The postcrania is super derived. This animal definitely walked on 2 feet. Its pelvis is bowl-shaped, very similar to anatomically modern Homo sapiens, but its upper arms are incredibly ape-like. It's built for suspension, almost like holding itself up like that. But then the hands are very anatomically modern human with a partial precision grip. And so in conventional science, this is because organisms tend to evolve in a mosaic way. Not everything is evolving at the same rate, which is why the perfect transitional isn't a partially bipedal, partial quadruped with a brain case midway between a chimp and a human, right? It's something with a small brain that's fully bipedal, because bipedalism evolved first. And with that, everything involved with bipedalism. So the shape of the pelvis, the inline big toe, the femoral head angle, valgus knee, things of that nature. Things don't evolve at the same time. It's not that clear cut. And they don't do that now, and they didn't do that then. We don't see that in the fossil record pretty much in any species. Nothing is a 50-50 perfect transitional. Things evolve at different rates. But it's still really problematic. I mean, eventually I'm sure we're going to get from the creationists, yes, so some ape men walked upright, but that doesn't make them humans. And then the next question is going to be, okay, what does, And they can't answer that. They can't come up with that list of criteria to distinguish human fossils from ape fossils, because that would be like, as Aaron Roth, likes to point out, finding something to differentiate dog fossils from canid fossils.
Right, like the half ape, half man thing doesn't even make sense, if you're speaking in phylogenetic terms. Like it's like half dog, half canine, or yeah. So obviously watching that video is pretty frustrating. I imagine making it was. Your debate with Kent Hovind was frustrating. What frustrates you about some of the people that you make responses to, or maybe that you used to make responses to?
That's a really good question. The thing that frustrates me more than anything is the illusion of trying to be a good faith actor. With a lot of these people, there is the outward attempt at looking like they want this to, we just want to have a conversation. We just want a dialogue. But when you pose difficult questions, all you get is a pivot, ever. There is no concession. There is no, okay, you might be right, but we're working on it, even. I mean, you get the only thing I've ever seen creationists do that on is the heat problem. And that's because it is so mind-bendingly problematic that they have to put their hands up. They have to say, okay, yeah, like, it looks like Noah's Ark has a huge heat problem. We can't get all the things that, you can't cram, billions of years worth of radiometric decay into a single half-year period and not burn, vaporize the granitic crust of the earth. So that's the one thing that they tend to be like, okay, fine, it's a problem for us and we're working on it. Everything else, they don't care what you propose. And with MFB, the classic is this. And I'm using,
I love that name.
That's he's the stand-in for all of them because they all behave this way with very few exceptions, and those exceptions do exist. Salvador Cordova doesn't tend to do this. Sal doesn't tend to do this. But they take point A, right? So let me think of an example. A perfect example actually is the transitional species thing with Australopithecus Sediba and Homo habilis. MFB will come out and say something along the lines of, there aren't transitionals, there's only apes, there's only humans. And then someone else, in this case me, will come out and say, that's an interesting statement that you made. Here's why it's incorrect. We know that there are indeed transitional species that are mosaic in nature. In fact, we've got a ton of them. Here's why we know that these species are indeed legitimate. Here they are in partial or full articulation in the ground. They are a legitimate species. How do you cope with that? Your turn. And then they go, there aren't any transitional species. Reassert A. It's cool that you think B, but we're not actually going to address the criticism that you have of our initial point. We're simply going to reassert it and say we've addressed what has said. Cool.
Yeah.
What was your response?
Yeah, it's not just that they've addressed it. It's the video title is that you've been destroyed. You've been annihilated.
Thoroughly refuted, early retirement, the classic adjectives. And it's like, if you've got to be that hyperbolic, you might be compensating for something. And I thoroughly, I love it when people are like, hey, Gutsick Gibbon, have you considered this? And it's something I genuinely haven't considered. Great point. I'll look into it, But that's not what you get from these guys. Because, and this is, as I've said a lot recently, this is my catchphrase for these guys, right? It's not about the answers. It's about the illusion of answers. That's it. They just want to maintain the illusion that this is still a conversation without actually having to address anything that you have to say. That's what it's like for Kent, and that's what it's like for MFB and pretty much all of the other YouTube creationists. They don't want the conversation or the discussion. They don't want to take what you said and look into it and actually come up with a decent, well-formulated response to it. So for instance, if they said carbon dating doesn't work and you say, yes, it does, here's a bunch of answers or a bunch of reasons why we know that it does in fact work. Radiocarbon dating is a good thing. Instead of actually like digging into your methodology or the things that you're saying, again, it's a reassertion of point one. So that's the thing that I hate the most. It's like, because I started this whole gig on Reddit in the debate evolution community, and it's a sad deal that the guys on Reddit are better at this than the YouTube guys, and even some of the professionals. They actually go out and try to find a way to support what it is that they're saying. They're not good at it, but they're better at it than the ones that are here on www.youtube.com.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like, man, I could come up with better creationist arguments than these guys could.
You'll only get better at that. It's just you'll only continue to get better at that. The longer that you kind of play around in this sandbox, the more that you realize, and this is another biggie, the arguments will recycle themselves. So in a couple years, you'll see what they were saying now, and they're saying the same thing again. They retire it for a little bit, and then it comes back into fashion.
especially with Kent, or he doesn't even retire his arguments. He just keeps making them.
But listen, eventually Kent's going to come back with the mammoth claim again. That's the only thing I've ever seen him actually take out of his presentation, but it'll be back. You know, he'll bring that bad boy right back into the fray and start talking about how they radiometrically dated the same mammoth and got two vastly different dates, just completely aware of, but absolutely not giving a single iota of a shit that it's two different mammoths, and that was explained to him multiple times, to the point that he removed it from his presentation. It'll be back if Kent is still alive, and since Kent is powered by spite for the government, he'll probably be alive in 10 years. He'll be reasserting that same point again. That's my prediction.
I even brought it up during our debate, and he completely ignored it, you know? But
I remember that.
Speaking of Dr. Kent Hovind,
University alum, Kent Hovind.
Yeah. One of the things he likes to say about Lucy is that she was just a 3-foot tall chimpanzee. Can you tell me, like, how wrong this is? Like, can you sort of elucidate this?
The thing is, so Kent is bottom tier creationist, and yet you will hear like AIG say the same thing, you know, and they will take it to the next level where they'll commission a reproduction of Australopithecus afarensis as this knuckle walking bonobo, basically. There are a couple of reasons why we know that Australopithecus afarensis was not a knuckle-walking quadruped, definitively. And the first and foremost is the location of the foramen magnum, which is the hole at the base of the skull. And I'm actually going to pull out a skull for this, because that's why I have them. So this is an Australopithecus afarensis skull. As I mentioned earlier, this is a reproduction of Lucy, so the bits that are filled in are from the actual Lucy specimen. The way we know that the skull actually looks this way comes from numerous other specimens. This is just a representation of Lucy in particular, which, interestingly,
that is awesome.
It's actually an awesome skull. It is. It's a very cool skull. Look at how
it's a little creepy.
Look at how transitional it is. It's actually I'm known for my small skull and amongst friends and families, and you know, Lucy is quite a bit smaller than humans, and we have a very similar size skull. But the foramen magnum of Lucy is right underneath the brain case. Lucy couldn't be a knuckle-walking quadruped without having to crane her neck like this constantly. The muscle attachments aren't there. It runs biomechanically contra to the actual physical evidence that we have of Australopithecus afarensis. Particularly, actually not Lucy, all of the other ones for which we have much better support for, or actually physical evidence of the crania. Another great example, and this runs true for all of the Australopithecines, actually, more particularly Australopithecus africanus, or africanus, as some say, because this individual, we have the skull with some of the vertebral column still coming out of it. It's actually preserved in that way. The Dakika child is what it's known as in the literature and things like that's the nickname it's been given. But it's not just the foramen magnum, right? Like, it's not just the foramen magnum that lets us know that this animal was definitively not a knuckle-walking quadruped. Lucy's pelvis is, like, to a 5-year-old, identical to the human pelvis. Now, there are a lot of minutia that makes it different and unique, but to an untrained eye, this looks like a human pelvis. In fact, in my debate with Kent, I actually showed a PowerPoint slide with Homo erectus, Homo sapiens, and Australopithecus afarensis pelvises alongside a chimp pelvis, and was like, a 5-year-old could tell you the chimp pelvis is the odd man out, because the chimp pelvis is the only one that's not walking bipedally. Australopithecines have a bowl-shaped pelvis like ours, and the reason is because it has to have a powerful pelvic floor to hold all the organs up and inside of you when you're standing upright. There's a reason why chimps and gorillas have kind of like a bulging belly when they're walking on all fours, because their organs are like actually pushing against the abdominal wall. And they can have serious issues, like circus chimps have had serious issues when they stand upright throughout the 50s and 60s. They used to have circus performing chimps. They'd have serious issues with like their organs, being super unhealthy, and sometimes their pelvic floor giving way, and they die because they have serious complications. They're not built to walk upright. They didn't evolve that way, at least not permanently. They do habitual habitual bipedalism, but usually only when they're like crossing. Like, it's not that they can't walk bipedally, it's just that they can't do it exclusively like we can.
Yeah.
But it's not just those two things. It's not just those two massive, clearly obvious skeletal features that denote the fact that Australopithecus afarensis is a biped. It's also the knee and the femoral head. So it holds its femurs at an angle like this, right? So that it can hold the weight of the entire body directly above the legs. This is how you walk efficiently. If you hold it too much forward, or too sprawled to the side, you're not an efficient biped. You're actually wasting energy by moving around like that. And then, of course, there's the more inline hallux, or big toe. So its toe is actually much more like this than it is divergent like that.
Mm-hmm.
It could still do some gripping. So they think maybe, Australopithecines might have been around in the trees a bit. But if they were in the trees, they also held themselves upright. We know that these guys weren't knuckle walkers, is what I'm saying.
I think it's possible that maybe the like Lucy species, maybe they didn't live exclusively in the trees, but it's possible that to escape a predator, they could have climbed up into a tree, and just waited until the predator, got bored and left, or
right.
Sort of left them
That's
alone.
Exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And this makes sense, actually, given the paleo environments that we know that these guys lived in, right? They're somewhat woody forests that give way to large savannas. They would have been great at this. This would have been, and they still have very primitive basal shoulders and upper arms, so they can still hold themselves, quite well in the trees if they needed to. But these guys aren't knuckle walkers. And the one thing that you'll hear that, yes, they were in fact knuckle walkers, is that they still have a partial notch for locking their knuckles in the distal ends of their arms, which isn't unexpected because, one, it's less extreme than what we see in legitimate knuckle walkers, extant knuckle walkers, but also because it's plesiomorphic. It's like retained. It's a retained relic. We have those now. We sit on our tailbones every day. This would be like saying that, a human definitively, golly, I could just go on and on and on. So I'm going to stop now before I do. True, Snake, you can't prove that fossil had any babies because single fossils evolve, not populations, of course.
Well, I guess a fossil can't get pregnant either.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I love that one from Kent. I love that one so much. He's a galaxy-brained man, that one.
Yeah, so creationists, they seem to have an emotional, almost visceral reaction to the idea that humans are animals, and especially apes. Can you talk about how you've tried to promote a more positive view of us being part of the animal kingdom, and apes especially?
I can. You're asking home run questions. You're asking all the questions that I can talk for hours and hours and hours about. So I thought I gotta watch myself. Yeah, humans are definitively apes. This is not something that we can get around. It's something that's awesome, though. The fact that we humans represent, and I paint this very romantically because I love anthropology and I love primatology. I study other primates. That's what I want to continue to do. And being a part of the animal kingdom is such an incredible gift. Imagine if we were separated from the rest of the natural world. This is the world we live in. This is the world that we are a part of. Our bodies are specifically evolved for this world. And that's, we could go into a whole being a good steward of the planet and, not accelerating climate change, because this is the perfect planet for us. It's the one we evolved on.
Yeah.
But being a part of the animal kingdom, and particularly with humans, being a part of one of the coolest underdog stories of kind of the Cenozoic, certainly, but even arguably of the entire history of life. We descend from firm mesopredators, from animals smack dab in the middle of the food chain, scared of most things, sometimes able to take down others. And here we are communicating on our computers from completely different states in the year 2021 in our air-conditioned or warmed homes, safe from any natural predators. We really did come, start from the bottom, now we're here. And that's part of our downfall too, certainly. But there's such beauty, as Darwin says, in this view of life, that we are a part of this continuous chain of animals successfully adapting to their environments. And, growing to overcome certain challenges, because so many organisms don't. The inevitable fate of most animals is extinction, or of course evolution, and eventually we'll meet one fate or the other. But for now, we occupy this really cool part of the mammal kind of family tree in particular, where we're a social species, that we're so social that we're sitting here again having this conversation through what is effectively time and space, which
Mm-hmm.
which is so empowering to me. We're an incredible animal in a lot of ways, and it's important to remember. I say that, of course, but on my channel I actually put a lot of emphasis on other apes being cooler in a lot of ways than we are, because all animals are cool and unique in their own way, such as the nature of evolving to fit a niche, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're the best at what you do in your given location. But I think the long story short of it is that humans are one of the only animals out there, and I say one of, allowing for kind of a gap of knowledge there, but that can appreciate and their own humility in the grand scheme of things. And not enough people find that empowering or beautiful. I think being just another ape is a cool thing. We are just another ape, and yet somehow we managed to get to where we are today.
Yeah, I agree. Because I know, some people like creationists or, people that don't appreciate it as much might say that, oh, I don't like the idea of being just an animal. But I look at it as more of, we're the end result of a long lineage of survivors, of people who had to, or, animals who fought against the odds, for one of the main reasons being that we can walk for a really long time and sweat a lot.
Yeah, and we like
Which
to hang out in groups.
mhm, which is something I learned from your new video.
Ah,
See, I'm
science
learning.
and
But I've always been under the impression that maybe the key moment in human evolution was walking upright and gaining bipedalism, because that allowed the spine to support a bigger skull and a heavier, bigger brain, and thusly you have more intelligence. Is that accurate? Because
so I would hesitate to link the two, just for the sole reason that bipedality evolves and becomes efficient much faster than the big brain comes on the scene. So your big brain case doesn't even really start to pop up until like late Australopithecus, and even then we're looking at early Homo that's actually taking this to the next level, and really amping up that big brain for your body size. And the interesting thing with that is that with early genus Homo, you've got things like Homo habilis, Homo rudolfensis, and Homo gadoliniensis coming along. They're about the same size as the paranthropines that are wandering around at the same time period, and yet they've got these big honking brains, in their skulls, in comparison to the paranthropines, who still have these pretty modest brain case sizes of 500, 600 cc's, compared to what we see in Homo habilis, 700, 800, even pushing 900. So yeah, thank you, Otangelo Grassel, my nemesis. Yeah, the question of why did big brains evolve is a really good one, and it's not one that's fully fleshed out. You've got some folks like Robin Dunbar out there who think that the big brain actually evolved, the social brain hypothesis, essentially. It's the big brain evolved because of our sociality. It's to maintain these relationships, and thus be able to have these larger groups and live copacetically with more individuals. But then there are others who think that it was a dietary thing, who think
yeah,
that
I've heard that too.
yeah, the addition of meat to the diet allowed us to have this kind of surplus of calories and energy, rather, to kind of seize and jump on these mutations that allowed for momentarily increases in brain case size. There are others still who think it has more to do with development. We kept our young, gestated our young for longer, and therefore they had more time to kind of grow these larger brain case sizes, and we gave birth earlier to much more helpless young. I mean, a baby chimpanzee almost out of the womb can at least hold on to her mother's fur. Our babies are like little meatloafs for the first 2 years, right? Like they can't do anything on their own. If anything, they're a liability because they're
Yeah, they're
constantly.
almost suicidal.
Yeah, they're trying to get themselves killed. They're screaming all the time. But that curiosity actually ends up paying off in the long run because it allows them to add so much information to those giant sponges inside their heads. And they're robust as hell too. I mean, babies like can just take a header down two flights of stairs and be fine at the bottom. So yeah, it's a total mystery. Total mystery. It's a slight mystery as to what actually led to big brains evolving. I am of the opinion always that it's never one thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's an awful way to look at ecology and an awful way to look at evolution. And it's really, really common still in the literature where people are like, this is it. I found the thing that caused X thing to evolve. It's never just that thing. Now, you can boldly claim, if you desire, that this is the primary cause, which is what I did in my thesis, where it's like, I think this is the primary thing that spurs, monomorphic canines in a dimorphic species. And that's very bold and not always the right thing to do. But to impose the idea that there's a single pressure, I think is kind of asinine. So to the long answer to your short question is we don't know, but I think it's probably a combination of group living, diet, and development.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I think we were talking about chimps and humans being sort of, similar in lots of different ways earlier. And, you can compare like things are similar on a chimp, but it seems to me that the human ear and the chimp ear are basically identical. And I would just love to hear, I haven't heard creationists explain this, but why do you think that is like that structure in particular would be so similar?
I mean, interestingly enough, like most primates have very, very similar ears, especially when you get into the hominoids. I mean, you look at a gorilla's ear or an orangutan's ear, and they're also really dang similar. And it's because it's just not a structure that's needed to adapt a lot. I mean, humans are primates, and most primates, especially the catarrhines, right? We are first and foremost a visual species. We look at things and we make decisions based off of what we see. Our least useful sense is our sense of smell. We've pretty much given this up. Our sense of smell is hot garbage. And the interesting thing about that is that we still have all of the genes for great smelling. 3% of portions of our, golly, I'm going to butcher this. It's like 3% is normal for mammals to dedicate in your genome for smelling. We still have that dedicated. It's just a lot of our genes are turned off. And interestingly enough, all of them in cetaceans are turned off. So why do they have them? It's kind of like an interesting little vestigial deal going on there. But there are a lot of things like what you're talking about. I mean, have you seen the hand of many of the hominoids? I mean, going like this, right? You can see the different wrinkles on my hand.
Mm-hmm.
And many of these wrinkles are identical in many of the other hominoids. The ears, the teeth is a big one. We have the same dental formula, the same Y cusping on our back molars. That cusp is unique to hominoids alone. We all have a 2-1-2-3 dental formula, which means you basically quarter the jaw. And so you have 2 incisors, 1 canine, 2 premolars, and 3 molars. It's the same for all the primates. We all communicate vastly with our facial expressions, right? Mm-hmm. We all have lips that are relatively big for, most animals just don't use our lips a lot. Humans and most primates have big lips that we use to make different vocalizations, because while hearing long distances isn't nearly as important as sight, it's still important. And the ear has evolved for kind of capturing sound in a very specific way. And it's kind of fine-tuned, if you will, to communication, to picking up the sounds of other individuals, which is why it's really interesting to look at the inner ear, which is actually what helps decipher the sounds before they get to the brain to actually be like decoded or whatever, lest we be ended upon by the ideas.
Oh, no.
Yeah, but they're tuned to some different frequencies. So chimps and humans obviously have the biggest overlap, but theirs is tuned a bit lower than ours is. And what we know about Neanderthals is that theirs is almost tuned a bit higher than ours is. And it has to do with how we vocalize, or for picking out syllables and sounds in the vocalizations of syllables and sounds for us language speakers. But Yeah, the ear is a good one. That's one I haven't heard a lot, but you're right. Yeah, very similar, almost identical with all the architecture.
Yeah, like I know that creationists can get a little bit uncomfortable with the similarities, but even for me, that's a little bit like, okay, uh, wow.
Yeah, there's another one of my favorites with that is like the physical similarities are fun and fine. I mean, Linnaeus was famous for looking at creationist father of taxonomy. Linnaeus was famous for looking at the skeletons of the hominoids and of humans and being like, "Uh-oh, I
Yeah.
don't know what to do here. These are really, really similar." And particularly the gibbon perturbed him. So
Yeah, and
because
he was a Christian, and he wanted to explain how they were separate, but he couldn't.
you're right. Yeah, 100%. He couldn't, and yeah, his quote is very classic. Lest I bring all the theologians onto my head for not separating them. And then he's like, maybe by virtue of the discipline, I should just do
Yeah,
it anyways.
I think he said he'd be under the ban of all Ecclesiastes.
Yeah,
Something
right,
like that.
right. Yeah, for me, the biggest thing is like obviously the skeleton, obviously the genome, obviously we share pretty much every muscle in our bodies with the other apes, with chimps. But a big one that I don't think is appreciated and will never be touched by creationists is behavior. That's a huge one. So I don't know if you've ever seen like teenage boys when they get mad at each other, but they kind of saunter up, or just like guys in general, like when they're doing MMA, like they kind of saunter up. There's a very particular body language to pre-fighting, right? Puff out their chest, shoulders back, kind of swiveling their head like that. If you've ever seen a chimp about to fight, they do that verbatim. They puff out their chest, they saunter, they do the exact same thing. I would love to do a side-by-side comparison of teenage boys about to fight or MMA fighters about to fight and chimps about to fight. It's the same thing. How mothers coddle and calm their young down. It's just like a human mother. How they carry their baby on their hip when they're walking bipedally, just like human mothers do, especially in hunter-gatherer societies.
Yeah, I've heard that sometimes female chimps will even like carry around sticks like their babies, like they'll cradle them, like stuff like that, and it looks like they're mimicking humans, but it's more like we're mimicking them almost.
It's always been that way. It's always been like people love looking at other apes and being like, look how like us they are. We're just like them. I mean, they have their own politics. They mourn their dead. They experience the same range of emotions that we do. They play tricks on each other. They laugh when tickled. I mean, they do anything that you can think of that a human does. Sort of in our basal interactions, chimps are probably doing it too. My favorite is when ideas are like, but look at the things humans build. Okay, they're just complicated tools. Everything we make is a tool, basically, to help us accomplish some given task, even if that task is as simple as comforting yourself, right? Or making a chore easier.
Or eating termites.
Or eating termites, or hunting babies with a sharpened stick. Or hammering walnuts open with your favorite rock that was meticulously picked and you carry around with you as you move about with the rest of your troop. These guys are doing that. And here's the killer. They've got a brain that's effectively 1/4 to 1/3 the size of ours. And they're doing all of this stuff. We haven't changed that much. It's just the changes that have been made are significant on the outset. They express themselves societally in very big ways.
Did you see the video of the orangutans using saws to saw wood?
Yeah, there's another really good one of Kanzi, a bonobo, who was taught, and then they film him doing it, how to start a fire and then make s'mores. So
Oh wow.
he lights a match and he starts the fire and he puts a marshmallow on the edge of the stick and he roasts it, and he's just like hanging out doing camping stuff. It's awesome.
That's crazy. I was thinking a second ago when you mentioned like doing a side by side of like a chimp sauntering up before a fight in a human. I think if you could like like the motion capture they do for video games where they put the little balls on a human. If you could do that for both, that would be interesting, and then compare the data between those. I bet it'd be very similar.
I bet you're right. I bet it would be similar. And to that point, there was a very interesting study done Years and decades ago, it was thought that chimps didn't use their facial expressions very much, and they couldn't recognize each other as well as humans could. And that was used to kind of put this emphasis on human advanced sociality, right? But the funny thing is, they were testing the chimpanzees with human faces and human facial expressions, and they used that to justify that they aren't as good as we are at identifying individuals and inferring facial expressions. But then someone thought, hey, how about instead we just do it with chimps? How about we show them chimp individuals and chimp facial expressions, and they track us for precisely. They recognize their own facial expressions, which are nuanced because we look very strange to chimps. We look like big babies. Like, imagine if you saw like a 6 foot tall human baby. That's kind of what we look like to chimps. We have very neonatic features. And a classic is that if you look at how the bones of the skull change from a human infant to our adulthood versus how a chimp's infant changes from adulthood, they change a lot more. It's actually called retained neoteny. We still have big eyes relative to when we were infants. You know, our prognathism is much less. Our brow ridges don't increase that much. So it's really neat.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I know that we have some content creators in common that we like Vosh and ContraPoints and Arn Ra. Can you name some other channels you enjoy? Like, have you ever seen Philosophy Tube?
I love Philosophy Tube. Yeah, Abby's awesome.
Yes.
Love Philosophy Tube. I watched Lindsay Ellis, of course. I watched one of my guilty pleasure. I guess it's not a guilty pleasure because her content's awesome. I love Jenny Nicholson. She does these really obscure media reviews that are really fun. Obviously, PBS Eons is great. One of my guilty pleasure subs is Bob Gimlin, who does like cryptid and Bigfoot videos. I think they're really interesting. Most of the time you can be like, okay, I think it's probably this, but I do think that they're quite fun to kind of follow. What else myself? I listen to a lot of true crime, so I like that chapter a lot for true crime stuff. 42 North or North 42, I think does some pretty good anthropology videos that I like quite a bit. SciShow's good. I like that too. What other?
You like a lot of bread tubers?
Yeah. I'm a little bit based in bread pill.
Have you heard of the channel Thought Slime?
Yeah. I know Thought Slime. I haven't seen much of their content myself, but I've heard good things.
Yeah. I love their videos. It's really good. So I would definitely recommend that.
Oh, cool. Awesome.
To check out that channel again. But yeah, Vosh, he is doing some really good charity work recently. So that's awesome.
The 24-hour Palestine Children's Fund stream. That I don't know how I couldn't stay up for 27 hours. I couldn't do it. I have absolutely no desire to stay up for that many hours. Although playing in 64 games is very fun, I don't think I could do it for 27 hours straight.
Yeah, maybe when I was like 12 and I would just do it incidentally, not really even trying.
Oh, yeah. H Bomber guy, he does great videos as well. He had a great vaccine video come out recently that was just very good.
I love his flat Earth video. I love
the measured response. Yeah, he's got a great climate change video too. With the sell their homes to who, Ben?
Yes.
Man, yeah, but that's
yeah. Oh man. Yes. So what are some like resources, like online or otherwise, that have helped you make content for your channel?
Oh man, there is a I'm not going to be too specific. There are a lot of websites that help you access papers that you might not otherwise be able to access that are very helpful. There's a certain Science Hub website that I use sometimes because I use it because I'm too lazy to actually go through my institution. Because you have to like sign in through your institution on every single website that you're trying to go through, whether it's like PLOS or you're going through Nature or whatever. I'm not about that. I'm too lazy for that. Other websites, I mean, funny enough, Talk Origins is really helpful. And Talk Origins hasn't updated their website in like a decade, and that should tell you how little creationist arguments have changed. Because Talk Origins basically still works.
It's a good point.
It used to.
Yeah, I mean, if I need a quick sort of refutation for like a creationist, I can't think of a better website to go to because it's just there, it's text. I can literally type in any subject that the person brings up and just be Google and that term and then talk origins, and then it's just like text, and then it's like it's so easy.
It's amazing. Yeah. Another one you should consider using is the Debate Evolution subreddit. That's also where I got my start. And if you can, like, if you need an answer to a modern creationist question, things like genetic entropy or Nathaniel Jeanson's mitochondrial mutation rate, like recent stuff, Debate Evolution's got you covered. I know all of the mods from Debate Evolution. They're all great. The community's changed a little since I was active about a year ago, but great community. And if you've got any questions, you can hop on there and ask it yourself. And professionals, like the folks who run it and the folks who are active there, usually, like almost all of them have a degree in their given subject that they come on and talk about. So you can pretty well.
I do lurk there sometimes.
It's very helpful if you're looking for modern stuff. Other good, there are some great blogs. Natural Historia is great, run by Duff, I think. That's a good one for creationist claims that are modern. Age of Rocks by Jonathan Baker is good for geology stuff. And if you're looking for just like general papers, paper updates, stuff like Science Daily can help you get a really good handle without having to get into the technical literature on what the new stuff is saying. Mm-hmm. So Anthropology Today, stuff like that, you can just Google like recent anthropology news and it's going to pop up and it'll be like, here's the general findings that they found, and they give the DOI so you can go check it out for yourself too. Great resource for doing like keeping up to date with current literature.
Awesome. Thank you for all that. So I think you said that your fiance's dad did 23andMe.
Yeah. He's really Neanderthal heavy. We've got some Neanderthals lurking around and in some foxes in the hen house way back in the day.
Wow. So I thought maybe it'd be fun to just sort of share some of the information that they sent me about how much Neanderthal DNA is in my genome, and et cetera. Yeah, and you could just sort of give your thoughts on that. So they say that apparently I have more Neanderthal DNA than 66% of other customers. And it says out of the 7,462 variants they tested, they found 249 variants in my DNA that trace back to the Neanderthals. And altogether, the Neanderthal ancestry accounts for less than 2% of my DNA.
Okay. So you've got some lurking around back there, but not too much. Not too much. Mm-hmm.
It tells you that how Neanderthal DNA might influence your traits. So it says I have one variant associated with having a worse sense of direction, one with being less likely to have a fear of heights, one with being a better sprinter than a distance runner. And like at 23andMe, like it'll go, like you can look on there and it'll say like, you know, you have an aversion to cilantro, or you have your ring finger is longer than your index finger, and all this stuff about me, and it's all right. I'm like, what the hell? Like, how do they? It's kind of amazing how accurate it is. Like, they can tell if your earlobe is detached, you know, from your like neck, just all this stuff, and it's really interesting. Like, if you haven't done it, I definitely recommend you do, because I think that would be a really cool video for your channel.
Yeah, I think so. I think that would be awesome. My kind of to that point, it's kind of funny. So they're in Neanderthals, one of their diagnostic traits is a hardened knob at the back of their skull. It's called an occipital lobe because the back of the skull is where your occipital lobe is housed, right? That's that lobe of the brain. And this occipital bun is what it's called. In Neanderthals, it kind of allows for a large occipital lobe. You know, Neanderthals consistently had larger brains than we do. And it's mostly in that occipital zone that they've got these big old brains. So my fiance's brothers, my future brother-in-law, he's like, he and I were talking when we had first started dating, and he was like, yeah, I got this, you do anthropology. I was like, yeah. And he's like, I got this kind of thinking knot on the back of my head. And I was like, a thinking knot? I was like, come over here. He turns over and I'm like probing the back of his skull. You know, I'm like feeling around. I'm like, holy shit, this is an occipital bun. I was like, it's small. but you've got like this little bun structure. And I told my human evolution professor, and he was like, oh my God, you have to get him to come in here. I would love to see that. He's like, I've heard some people have it, but I've never like met someone who did. And my fiance's got a much smaller one, just almost like a little knob. It's not even that impressive as far as his occipital bun goes, I should say.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's really funny because their dad has 5% Neanderthal, so it's interesting how it kind of does show up in descendants, you know.
So I saw that you did some like gaming content on your channel recently. What was the game you were playing where you're sort of running around as an ape? And do you plan on doing more of that in the future, or was it just sort of like a one-off thing?
I mean, I think it's fun. A lot of people really liked that. I got a lot of really good feedback for the epic gaming streams. And I also got some not so good feedback where people were like, I don't sub to you for gaming. So I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with it. I mean, I really enjoyed it. It was a great opportunity to just chat with everybody and out while I'm, playing. The game was Ancestors: The Humankind Odyssey. And I would love to do that with a couple of other games that are kind of known for being anthy. Like I'd love to do Far Cry Primal. I think that'd be a fun one.
Yeah.
There are a couple of games like that I think would be very enjoyable to do from a kind of a, hey, this is my background and here's what I think about it perspective.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
I mean, at least the game's relevant to the channel, right? Like if you were just playing something that was completely like Rocket League or something, I could maybe understand the complaints, but it's...
Yeah. Well, and usually, to be fair, I got way more positive feedback than negative feedback on those. But, it was kind of just something I was doing every Monday to kind of just for fun. So I don't know. If I do it again, I might limit it to I might put it to another channel. But we'll see. Or I might keep it on. I don't know. I'm still trying to decide. I might put a poll out there. We'll see how everybody. But the people who answer the polls are usually like really cool, and they're like, do what you want. Like they're not going to unsub because I'm playing video games. But I did have a very, very fun, very based interaction with MFB, who was criticizing me to go play video games and let the adults talk, he says. And I say, well, I noticed I didn't start my gaming streams until I was like mostly done with my thesis for my master's, the one that I'm hoping to submit for publication. How are the Amazon books doing? Like it's okay. Like you're gonna come out and start playing video. Wait, what kind of boomer shit is that, right? Like, video games are for babies. Like, okay.
Yeah. It's any angle they can attack from, Okay, so we're getting into the final questions finally. I wrote a lot of questions, so.
No, please. Again, you don't want to shut me up. I'll go for a long time on these.
Yeah, no, I'll rein you in, Erika. But okay, so if hypothetically we do start to see some small improvements in like the content and actions of like YEC YouTubers, like what do you think that would look like, or what do you want to see them get better at, even if it's something small?
Oh my God, this is I get to give my creationist wish list. This is great. This is perfect. First and foremost, I would love to see the ceasing of platforming other more dangerous science denialism, like prominent anti-vaxxer content. I would love to see that go away. Prominent anti-mask content. Let's get that out of here too while we're at it. I would love to see better behavior, as in a lot of the rhetoric and banter that comes out of many of these channels. And if I'm dunking on creationist channels, assume Sal is not included. His behavior is excellent. He's a good guy. It's almost all MFB and associates.
You know who you are.
Yeah, and Galaxy Brain Matt Powell is also in this list. Real smart guy. Love him. Excellent content. Only the best. So I would love to see a ceasefire with regard to like needless aggression as well. I mean, if what they're claiming is a desire for discussion and dialogue, then there is no need to call people names or tell them that you could break them in half. That kind of stuff is just like, I tend to think, okay, if you're threatening to attack the other person, one, that's great support from my side of the argument that you're an angry chimp. But also, it makes me think that you don't actually have any arguments. So if you're going to be needlessly aggressive and say you're going to beat the other person up, I'm just going to assume that you're hanging out on the playground in middle school again. I'd love to see both of those things by the wayside. As far as, so, better behavior overall, kindness, professionality, civility, things like that. Yes. Yeah, John Maddox. Whew, that's a great example of the opposite of how you should behave with people if you want to be civil.
Yeah, I'm highlighting all of these. All of his comments are going up. So.
Yeah, they're superb. But in a more serious fashion, as far as okay, if the civility were to come back, and we were to lose the actual dangerous pseudoscience, and since this is my wish list, I would love to see the bigotry go away too, but I don't anticipate that that's as achievable as the outright dangerous pseudoscience. So I'd love to see some actual engagement with the arguments. So instead of, for instance, 2-hour rambling videos, I would like to see shorter videos that actually systematically address a single problem, or maybe in these larger videos, a table of contents would be nice in the description that says, hey, here's what we're talking about. Go here if you want to hear about this. Go here if you want to hear about that. And if perhaps guests are on, it would always be nice that the guests remain limited in scope to the areas that they know about. For instance, if you're having a guy with an MS in geology, maybe they shouldn't be talking about things like the races of humans, right? Like that feels like a wrong assignment there. So those are some of the things that I would like to see. I think that we'll never really get that. I think that that's kind of off the table. I would also like to see, as at the very tippy top of my wish list, that is a definitive would never happen, actual predictions from some of these YouTube creationists instead of relying on source cherry picking from the big boys would be nice, as well as from the big boys, a cohesive model, a singular cohesive model with mechanisms that changes as problems pop up, as models should do. Altering your hypothesis, trying to accommodate the data. Now, as always, a model that accommodates the data is inherently inferior to the model that predicts the data, right? That predicts future data, like evolutionary theory does hundreds of thousands of times yearly, actually. In any study that uses a phylogenetic correction, you're relying on common descent. Medicine, agriculture, these are fields that rely on evolutionary theory working. The age of the Earth underpins the entire energy industry. You don't find oil without being able to model basins. That isn't something that can happen. So our entire economy, from our healthcare to the cars that we drive, relies on the paradigm of evolutionary theory and the age of the Earth. So if you're going to be overturning that paradigm, you need a cohesive model with predictive mechanisms. And I don't think we're going to get that any more than we're going to lose the bigotry. So,
yeah, I agree with everything you said. Although when you mentioned earlier that guests should, talk about the topic that they are well educated in, I would like to take this opportunity to ask you, Erika, are you a geneticist?
Here, I'll give you the full soundbite. I'm not a geneticist. Can add that to the list, the ever-growing list. I am incredibly flattered that Raw Matthew felt the need to consume hours of my content to make that list. For those of you who may not know, in the side chat, there is this video that circulates mostly in the young Earth creationist communities that is a supercut of me saying I'm not a geneticist, which is, of course, my only weakness. And it spans dozens of videos and dozens of debates. To find all of those times that I said that, the consumption of my content would have to take over 24 hours. I have to imagine. So incredible. I love it. I'm very, very happy that some of these creationists are watching my video.
Yeah, maybe a side effect, an unintended side effect, will be that they'll actually learn something from watching all of your videos to clip out those, short sound bites.
One can only hope. But I do want to add something to what you just said, because you highlighted a mistake of mine that I made a couple moments ago. You can be an expert in your field and talk about things that aren't in your field, as long as you source them well. That's what pretty much everybody here on YouTube does. When you're talking about what you don't know about, you can do that as long as you source yourself. That was incorrect of me to say that you strictly have to talk about what you know. My problem is more when the authority of your given field is weaponized to talk offhand about things you know nothing about. If you're not going to provide the sources from them, or you haven't done so at another location. So, for instance, I'm not a geologist, but I can sit here and talk about how important basin modeling is, because I've talked to geologists, and that's like documented on my channel. And I can provide those sources in the comments here as well if need be. But if you're going to profess yourself to be an expert in one field and then talk outside of that, my request is that you source what you're saying as much as you can.
Right. And when those people are speaking about a topic where they're sort of challenging the scientific consensus versus somebody like me, like if I'm a layman and I'm talking about, like, say, evolution, but I'm simply agreeing with what the consensus in science is, and I'm sourcing from places like, I don't know, the National Center for Science Education about what the definition of evolution is, and then you have somebody like Kent Hovind giving his definition of evolution. I think it's fair to say, it's better to be siding with the consensus versus if you're a layman and you're posting something that's going against it. Well, you better have a lot of evidence or some sort of expertise to be able to refute the consensus if you're going to challenge it.
Absolutely. And to add to your excellent point there, you have to have what's the word I'm looking for? You have to have a precedent. That's it. You have to have a precedent for overturning the paradigm. So paradigm shifts have happened in the past. The classic example that everyone uses is relativity from Newtonian physics, because there were things that Newtonian physics could not explain. Once you started getting into things like orbital mechanics, Newtonian physics failed to actually account for that data, right? That's where relativity comes in. It's not that Newtonian physics doesn't work anymore and is booted from the marketplace of scientific ideals, right? Like, it's still here. We use it constantly. It was simply adjusted with relativity coming into the scene. We haven't had a paradigm shift to that level, like, since then, unless you go back to like heliocentrism coming onto the scene from geocentrism. And even that wasn't a paradigm or sort of a classically held idea by the scientific community. It was held by the church and the public at large. Those are two inherently different things. If someone's like, oh, but we were wrong about like the sun circling the earth, then you can just say, well, the scientists weren't wrong about that. A lot of the scientists were getting that right even earlier, right? I mean, and then when you talk about paradigm shifts after that, you're talking about more it's the addition to present science.
So, Erika, you're quite a talented artist. How long have you been sort of drawing, and what influenced you to have the sort of art style that you have? Because I really like it.
Oh, thank you. That's a massive compliment. I would not call myself an artist. I doodle and I like to draw cartoons, and that's because I love cartoons. I love all cartoons pretty much. If it's an animated movie, I've probably seen it. I find them to be very fun, very whimsical. I love looking at the animation. I think they tell excellent stories. It's a perfect medium for getting into things that are fantastic in concept. And I like fun slapstick things from Looney Tunes and all the way up into modern day cartoons that are also really awesome, like Avatar: The Last Airbender, for example. And some anime, which are also really good. I mean, I just think it's an awesome art form, and I do my best to imitate it, because there was a time many moons ago when I wanted to be an animator, and then I realized what actually went into animation, and I thought, I think I'm going to shelf this for now. I was like, that's a lot. It's a lot of work. You put in 12 hours and you get 4 seconds of good animation. and even mine is like significantly like fewer frames per second than some of the stuff that you see produced professionally. As for what influences my style, I this is kind of funny in an ironic way, but I really like the art style of Jamie Hewlett, who does the art for Gorillas, and he also did
Oh,
the
yes.
Girl.
Yeah, I could see that now. That's true.
It's much more so. It used to be much more true than it is now. The cartoons that I use for the channel isn't inspired as much by that as it kind of used to be. But I used to. Jamie Hewlett is one of my favorite artists for cartoon.
Mm-hmm. Well, in my opinion, if somebody is creating art, then that means you can call yourself an artist. And if you're creating animations, then that makes you an animator. And I
How
think the animated intro on your videos is incredible, in my opinion, especially the
well,
music. I think it's great.
The thing is that like that's my current like my current penultimate or my current ultimate, right? Like that is my my high point for animating. I would love to someday do that same kind of animation again, but like add to it, because that song is actually quite a bit longer. That song is "The Mind Electric" by Hawaii Part 2, or from the album Hawaii Part 2, which is a very weird eclectic album. But I think I don't know, I really like it. It kind of asks for an animation, I think.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you like it. Thank you. I've actually gotten great feedback on that intro, which I was surprised and very flattered. I can only my brain was like, okay, it's because the people who watch your channel are like science people, and usually science people aren't the folks that are animating, so their standards are lower. So that's how I'm framing
it. Well, you're quite talented, in my opinion. So
well, thank you, AJ. That's very kind of you.
So you're planning to start your PhD in the fall. How old do you think you'll be when it's completed? Basically, I'm wondering when I can start calling you Dr. Gibbo.
Wouldn't that be amazing? Oh God. Well, the nice thing is it's kind of a double-edged sword, but I actually have a graduate assistantship, so I don't have to pay for any of my tuition, but I am teaching while I get my PhD. So my job while I'm getting my PhD is I teach. I do labs and stuff like that. I'm going to be teaching biological anthropology labs. And there will be a period, as PhDs usually go, and since I'm doing, I'm hoping to stay in primatology rather than going for human evolution, which I love, but primatology is my passion. Primatology is graphic design is my passion. I love primatology and extant primates more than I'm interested in the fossil hominins or even the Miocene apes, even though they're really awesome and I love them. So there will be a period in my PhD where I'll probably have to leave the internet for a decent period of time, or at least be more absent than I am now, because I'll have to go and collect data, and I'll probably be somewhere relatively remote for that.
You'll be like King Crocoduck.
Yeah. So I'm kind of hoping, some field sites have decent internet, so maybe I could do like, I don't think I'd be able to do like nice edited videos, but I could at the very least do almost like a vlog style. Here's what I'm doing. If I can manage to upload that with the bandwidth that we have. That's like way down the line though. For the next probably year or two, I'll just be teaching and and making videos, which is, awesome. I'm actually really excited for it. But I hope to have my PhD done optimistically in like 4 or 5 years. But I am teaching, so it could take, realistically, it might be more like 6.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I think you would make a great teacher if you did that as a career, because I've learned a lot just in the stream. Like, I'm not even kidding. And you're somebody who really makes it easy to learn this difficult subject matter.
Well, that's awesome, and I think the key to it is at least all my favorite professors, because what the dream would be to be a research professor. I would love to do teaching in the fall and in the spring at a university, and then going and doing my research in the summer somewhere cool, looking at monkeys, because there aren't any monkeys here in the United States. Other than the ones in Congress, zing. Yeah, I'm thinking I would love to do that. I think some of my favorite professors I have ever had were the ones that are just head over heels in love with their subject. One of my best professors taught entomology. and he was like he formally studied mites, right? Like that's what he did as his research as a research professor. He was a mite guy, and mites are not exciting, but listening to this guy talk about mites, I was like, holy shit, mites are amazing. This is the coolest thing ever. And I developed a secondary passion for anthropology, for arthropods, for entomology, because this guy, my professor, he was just so good at kind of like exposing us to his passion, and that's kind of what I hope to do. You know, when hopefully I can be a professor, but that's what I aim to do here on YouTube. Is I think all this stuff is super epic, and I just want to share it with everyone else. Because it's just so cool. Our past as a species is awesome. Our cousins alive today are cool. It's just the whole world is just missing out on a huge piece of their own history when they miss out on studying primates and studying human evolution. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Well, your passion is infectious, Erika.
That's the goal.
So would you say that professor thought that mites are tight?
Yeah, mites were tight. Yeah, he was absolutely head over heels for mites.
I apologize.
No. Don't ever apologize for jokes like that.
Well, Erika, thank you so much for coming on. Before we end this interview, I just wanted to say congratulations on your engagement and submitting your thesis.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, this has been this past year and a half, as 2 years, I guess you would say, it's been a big time for me. I'm excited. I'm just high on life right now.
Yes, I can tell.
Through it all, I'm psyched. So, and thank you so much for having me on. I mean, you basically just asked me the questions that I love to answer the most and kind of let me run with it. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, well, I've got one more question, and basically, I guess without divulging any more personal info than you're comfortable with, like, what's the future for like Gutsick Gibbon personally, academically, and as a YouTube channel?
We're going pretty steady right now. I mean, nothing too big change wise is in the immediate future. I'm pretty settled where I'm at location wise. I'm going to be starting my PhD in the fall. I'm going to be getting married officially probably sooner than I'm going to do a wedding ceremony, because I hope to we're hoping to move into a house instead of renting. But the market is horrible for that right now, so who knows what's actually going to happen. Long term, I'm hoping to get my PhD. I'd love to be a research professor, and I hope to specialize in sexual dimorphism and extant primates, because I think that it's really interesting and I like to talk about it. YouTube-wise, I'm hoping to just keep releasing videos. I'm kind of trying to broaden my videos a bit more. There are a lot of series that I kind of want to get started on, and as much as I love dunking on creationists, I think I'm probably going to open it up a little bit more and do some more conventional science stuff. And I also have a video coming out somewhat soon about dunking on this absolutely incredible video from Gaia Streaming Services, which genetically modified skeptic, colloquially called Netflix for insane people. It's like spirit science streaming service. They have this video called The Lost Ancient Humans of Antarctica. So I made this video on it. It's great. I love it. I think it's very fun as a video. I upload it and it's copyright striked by Gaia, and to add insult to injury, all my ads are Gaia ads now. So it's like, not only are they advertising to me, but they've blocked my critique of their content for the next little while. So, and I've got like 3 videos that are all going to get copyrighted, that are already filmed and stuff, that have Gaia content. So I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm disputing them, but we'll see what happens. And then I've got some, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Okay, so did you say you have videos you haven't uploaded yet that have this content in them that you expect to get struck?
I have 2 videos coming up that I haven't actually uploaded that have not been uploaded, but they have Gaia content. Why? What is your suggestion?
Okay, well, Jim Sterling sort of found out that if you have content from one copyright holder and then you add like a clip from Harry Potter in it, the 2 companies will both claim the video and neither one of them can run ads on it. So nobody makes money on the video.
Good. I just want to spite them. I am not happy. Gaia has already they're already on my hit list for some of their garbo claims, but then they copyright strike me and expect me to subscribe to Gaia as if I would ever. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Maybe I'll have to take that advice. But it's disputed, but I think they've got a little while before they got a couple. I think they have like 30 days to act on it. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. No garbo for the Gibbo.
No garbo for Gibbo.
Okay. Well, thank you, Erika, and thank you to everybody in the chat. That's going to do it for this video. So I don't know how long that was, but yeah, that's about it. So thank you for everybody for showing up, and hit the like button, go to Erika's channel, go to buy her merch, and yeah, just do all the things.
And subscribe and hit the bell. Hit the bell for notifications. Yeah, you can. I always forget that one, but hit the bell. On Atheist Junior's channel is what I'm saying. Don't hit the bell on that.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.